Have you ever heard that red meat causes depression? Well, here's the truth. There's not a single randomized clinical trial showing that red meat causes depression. Not one. And today, I'm going to show you why your body and your brain need the red meat. Let's start with what matters most, the facts and the fix. So even if you only stay for a minute, you're going to leave with value. First, the facts. There's never been a single randomized clinical trial showing that eating red meat causes depression. In spite of what you see with many headlines out there that have drawn this conclusion, this is all a byproduct of just observational data, which frankly is the weakest form of evidence that you can lean on. It doesn't draw a direct causation, association at best, but it doesn't show cause. It just ignores the full picture of your health. It ignores the full spectrum of the human diet. And the other thing that these headlines and these studies often do is that they lump processed meat in with grass-fed and finished meat. They include in diets that are high in refined carbohydrates and that just in general have low dietary quality. It's all the same category. Well, just listening to that, you know inherently that those foods are going to generate different outcomes. So if those are the facts, and we've been led down the wrong direction, well, what's the actual fix that you should be looking for? Well, the one that we're going to focus on here is eating real food. So many times that's just what it simply comes back down to, and in this case it's going to be back to grass-fed and finished beef. Now there are certainly other red meats that you can use to support your or that you can use as a part of your diet, so those work just as well for this conversation. But remember, we're talking about depression and brain health, and if we want our brain and our mood to be stable, well, red meat's going to help lower inflammation. Again, contrary to what we often hear on this, it's going to supply the exact amino acids that are needed for neurotransmitters. So to say that a bit differently, it's going to give you the direct precursors for the chemicals that your brain functionality depends upon. In addition, it's also going to stabilize your blood sugar and optimize energy production. So when it comes right down to it, guys, red meat, it's not a cause of depression. It's an antidepressant. And that's not opinion, that's historical observation. And there's so much more that I want to share with you about this topic, but if you like where we're headed so far, well, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. And while you're here, why don't you go ahead and drop a comment letting us know why this video piqued your interest. Now, if you've never watched one of my videos, I'm Dr. Arland Hill. I'm a clinician and a rancher, and I see both sides, the physiology and the food. And when you understand how real food interacts with your biology, guys, frankly, the truth, it just becomes so obvious. And this is the story around red meat. Red meat isn't the enemy. And in many cases, it's the missing piece, more often than not. So with that being said, let's break down why that's also true when it comes to depression. I'm often left in bewilderment at how often the conclusion from professionals is eliminate red meat because it's at the center of the health epidemic. Really? We as humans have depended upon red meat across the globe for centuries upon centuries. So how all of a sudden does this change? Logically, that doesn't make sense. And when you get down to looking at these studies, you have to ask the question, what are studies really measuring? And most of these studies, in fact, pretty much all of these studies, are looking at the science from an epidemiology standpoint. So that's an observational, look at the information. It draws associations. It's the starting point for where investigation into a topic should begin. It may allow you to see some patterns that you can start to investigate and look deeper and see if there's truly causation there, but this hasn't been the case when it comes to red meat. At best, we can say association, but association doesn't mean that it's bad for you. And again, in this context, that just, again, flies in the face of historical evidence. When you look at the subjects that are eating red meat in these diets, red meat is a very, very loosely utilized term. It also includes a lot of processed foods. Many times when they're looking at red meats, they're including in processed meats. There's no differentiation between a just say like a true cut of a grass-fed and finished piece of beef or a steak or ground beef versus what someone is using as a processed meat, or say maybe a deli meat. These things are all lumped into the same category, and the nutritional profiles on these are different. The sodium content in these is different. The types of fats that are going to be found in these are going to be different. It just doesn't give a true representation of what the type of red meat that's coming into these diets are. And it also doesn't factor in the total diet. The other thing that I will look at or acknowledge with you when you start looking at the problems with these studies, and this is universal across almost all nutritional studies that are not clinical trials but are observational studies, for the most part, literally across the board, these are being used as these studies are being executed by doing recall, dietary recall. Well, just think for yourself. What did I eat for breakfast yesterday morning? Or what did I eat for dinner 2 nights ago? Sometimes it's hard to even remember that. And now you're starting to ask someone what they ate over the last couple of months? That's not realistic. And so you can see that even with the taking in of the data, with the accumulation of the data, there's some problem there as well. There's no nutrient analysis being done in these studies. Again, they're epidemiological. That's just not what's done in these studies. And you really need clinical trials to try to draw out these particular conclusions that are often being stated from these studies, but they're not clinical trials. You know, so often you see the headlines, and these headlines are written very much from an inflammatory perspective. They're meant to grab attention, and they're sensationalized. So a lot of words that you'll find in these headlines are meant to paint red meat, or a lot of times whatever the other topic is, meant to paint it in a negative light because they know that that will grab your attention. But you have to ask yourself, if I set the fear aside and I just look at the evidence, does that headline actually translate to what I should be looking at with my diet? And many times it does not. This is where that we see that the sensationalization from reporting, or we see that marketing for products that are anti-red meat, that's where you have to really look beyond that and ask deeper questions. A lot of times individuals will cut out nutrient-dense food and they end up feeling worse. Well, logically, you took the nutrients out. You bought into those headlines. And this is an absolute travesty, but it is the norm in our healthcare model. And it's also why when we look at mental health, we can see that mental health declines when the brain is underfueled. So, you know, I think back, like I was thinking back, I've come from an agriculture background. I've been in farming and ranching my entire life. And so when I think back about my grandfather used to have this word that he would call, or that he used, it was called hogwash. And he would say, stop listening to that hogwash. It just doesn't make sense. Hogwash means it's worthless or meaningless or foolish talk. And so often when I hear these narratives about red meat being bad and being a driver of depression, when in reality it's the exact opposite, to me, that's hogwash. So with that being said, let's look at what the real physiology says. I have 3 reasons for you that red meat is going to serve more of an antidepressant role. Number 1 is that red meat lowers inflammation. Yes, you heard me correct. Red meat lowers inflammation. Inflammation is one of the most replicated biomarkers when it comes to depression. Neuroinflammation. It is a driver of depression. It exacerbates depression. It damages the cell structures in the brain that are ultimately responsible for energy production. If you can't make energy production, or if you can't make energy efficiently, you're going to ultimately lean towards depressive states. So if you think about direct ways of inhibiting inflammation, well, let me just share a few with you here. At the top of my list, I'm going to give you some amino acids, carnosine and anserine. These are 2 peptides that are unique to proteins. They're not only found in red meat. In fact, poultry does have these, but carnosine is found in a higher quantity in red meat. And you also add to carnosine and anserine taurine, and that's also going to reduce inflammation. Now, not to mention that when you're eating quality sources of red meat, grass-fed, grass-finished, ideally raised in a regenerative context, those are also going to increase the availability of antioxidant vitamins and minerals. And you're also getting as far as those amino acids, to go back to that for a second, you're also getting precursors for glutathione. Well, what's glutathione? Well, glutathione's only the biggest antioxidant, one of the most valuable antioxidants in the body, and it's made from 3 amino acids, a short peptide, glycine, glutamine, and cysteine. Those are the 3 amino acids that you need to make that, and red meat is an excellent source of being able to get those in. When you're looking at these grass-fed and finished animals, they're also going to be higher in omega-3s relative to non-grass finished animals. They're going to have higher amounts of conjugated linoleic acid, and that's going to be anti-inflammatory, and you get the inclusion of what are known as secondary metabolites from that animal out grazing on a diversity of forage. Those are translated into the meat, and those have anti-inflammatory benefits as well. All these are just set to improve the mood pathways or the neurotransmitter pathways. But here's the cool thing. Those are all the direct pathways. Well, what about the indirect pathways that red meat can lower inflammation? It's going to be able to do this by offering system-level benefits. So meaning benefits that are being universally applied throughout the entire body. Red meat stabilizes metabolic pathways that are going to feed neuroinflammation. So, for example, if you don't have a good consumption of protein, and again, red meat being ideal here for our context, if you're not getting a good amount of protein in, you're not optimizing the integrity of your gastrointestinal lining, which means that you're going to increase the probability of leaking things across that gastrointestinal lining. This is what we would call endotoxemia, meaning that the toxins that are in your GI tract that should be getting excreted are getting reabsorbed. One of the most common ones that's going to be on this list is simply known as LPS. That's an acronym for lipopolysaccharides, but these are very problematic stimulants for your immune system. And when there's an overload of these, they begin to create that neuroinflammation, which is going to exacerbate the dysfunction related to depression. The other thing that you have here is as you're getting some of these more systemic level benefits from adequate red meat consumption, red meat is excellent for preserving and especially building muscle tissue, and that can have an impact on decreasing inflammation even as we age. So when it comes to cutting meat out of the diet, if you go and do that, one of the things that you're probably going to mistakenly do, and I see this so often when I work with patients, is that they're cutting out meats, and what do they replace that with? Carbohydrates. Well, what is that going to do? It's going to exacerbate the inflammation, because you'll see as I get into the latter portion of this video, we need stable blood sugar to optimize our neurological function. So if you're cutting out red meat, you're losing nutrients, you're bringing in the wrong constituents, the wrong macronutrients in the diet, and you're destabilizing the very systems that you could be supporting to help lower your inflammation. And inflammation, again, guys, remember I said that is one of the most reliable biomarkers for depression. Now, reason number 2 that you want to consume red meat, and to me, this is the most straightforward reasoning that you might want to consider, is that it is a direct precursor for your neurotransmitters. The very chemicals that you need to offset depression come from getting adequate protein in your diet. There's also a role that's coming from the support from the microbiota in your gut, but the point here is with the protein, if you're looking to try to build the neurochemicals like dopamine that's going to give you motivation, it's going to allow you to concentrate and focus, it's going to allow you to feel good about the things that you're doing, You're looking to produce norepinephrine, serotonin. Serotonin is going to make you more social. It's going to allow you to enjoy the things that you're engaging in. The production of GABA. GABA is the brake pedal. So if you're an individual that has racing thoughts and anxiety is a part of your depression, well, good chance that your GABA levels aren't being optimized, and having adequate protein in the diet can support that as well. And then you also have acetylcholine, which is linked to your brain speed. That is going to directly affect your ability to balance between your fight or flight modes versus your rest and digest. So if you're looking at what is it that's going to directly support serotonin, getting adequate tryptophan, one of your essential amino acids. If you need to support your dopamine, again, trying to optimize motivation here, that's going to be your tyrosine and your phenylalanine. If you're looking to optimize GABA to slow down that speedy brain, the brain that just doesn't want to seem to shut off, well, that's going to be glutamine that's going to do that. And by the way, glutamine's also going to nurture those microbiota that are going to also in turn help produce the different neurochemicals that I'm specifically alluding to here. And not to mention that red meat's an excellent source of choline. And choline, as the name implies, is a component to acetylcholine. And acetylcholine is what's going to give you brain speed. It's directly anti-inflammatory, and it is not a neurochemical that you want to be without. So if you're getting in red meat, and especially if you're getting some fat in, getting some good fatty, high quality fats, again, it's the reason I push for the grass fed and the grass finished, then that is going to give you the choline. Not to mention that you're also going to inherently be consuming creatine. A lot of information out there on creatine, but for our topic today, creatine is going to improve brain energy. The more you can optimize the energy production in the brain, well, the more antidepressant effect that you're going to have. If you're asking yourself, why does all this matter? Well, depression correlates strongly with deficiencies in protein and deficiencies in amino acids. So getting that protein in gives you those amino acids, and that's going to translate into you being able to build these neurochemicals that I've been suggesting through this portion of our conversation here. Low red meat diets require supplementation to compensate for this. So that inherently tells you that when you cut red meat out, especially when you cut out a lot of protein in your diet, you're putting yourself into a deficit and you're increasing the risk for not building these neurotransmitters and for not being able to optimize your neurotransmitter functionality, and that potentially leads you down the road to depression. So without these precursors, motivation not good, mood's not good, your mental clarity is going to decline. Now, before we move on, I need to say this clearly. The benefits that I'm talking about come from real red meat, not the industrial feedlot or processed variation that these studies are lumping together. And if you're in Texas or Louisiana and you want nutrient-dense, pasture-raised, grass-fed and finished beef, the kind that actually supports neurotransmitter production and reduces inflammation, well, that's exactly what we raise at Harvest Hills Ranch. And this is where your food and your physiology come together. They were designed to work together, and when you can trust where your food is coming from, well, that's the kind of support that you're leaning on for your family. Now, reason number 3 that red meat is going to be optimal for offsetting depression is that it is going to stabilize blood sugar, which is going to translate into mood stability. So here's some key points to note on this. Protein is going to slow down the glucose absorption from your stomach and from your small intestine. So you assimilate glucose slower, it enters the bloodstream slower, which means that it's going to prevent your spikes in insulin. And if you prevent the spike in insulin, then you also prevent the crash in insulin. So that means that you have stable blood sugar. Stable blood sugar translates to stable cortisol. You're not initiating that stress response. And in addition, you're also balancing your appetite hormones like your GLP-1, your ghrelin, your leptin, if you've heard any of these. Red meat is going to provide excellent satiety per calorie. So when you look at, especially comparing it to a carbohydrate, you're going to get more of a satiated effect from consuming that protein, that if you're not consuming it, you're likely reaching for food more often. You may find that you're starting to snack more than what you should, and you just don't want to do that, because when you start to get into these patterns where your blood sugar is swinging back and forth, that's going to lean you down the road towards anxiety, depression, which is ultimately what we're trying to stop here. And when you start to replace meat with carbohydrates, well, that also worsens that emotional volatility. We don't want to do that. You want to build a stable base with your diet, consuming adequate amounts of protein, and especially red meat, because of the way that it optimizes for you when you're looking to try to stabilize blood sugar and offset depression. So if I can kind of leave you with a reality check here. So first of all, at the outset, I just want to acknowledge that depression is complex. And I'm not suggesting that increasing red meat or even protein in general should be the only thing that you should be looking at. But what I am acknowledging is that red meat and protein as a whole is very, very foundational. And if you don't have it, if you're consuming low protein and you have associated nutrient deficiencies, well, frankly, you can expect your depression to be worse. We don't want that. Having that foundational intake of protein is going to complement any antidepressant approach that you're looking to engage in, whether that's exercise, whether that's pharmaceuticals, whether that's nutraceuticals, whatever that is, it doesn't matter. Protein only stands to make that better. So why wouldn't we engage in this? Humans have always thrived eating red meat. It is illogical to think that over the last just couple of decades that something inherently has changed within the human physiology where we should stop eating red meat because it's exacerbating depression. That's not true. It's not an accurate observation. We want to think logically about this and acknowledge what is the quality of the food and how much of that food are we consuming. Are we consuming an amount that is optimal for us personally? You can almost be guaranteed that when you remove adequate amounts of protein, and especially red meat, you're going to create some consistent biochemical deficits in your body. It is almost predictable. Your cumulative solution is to stop fearing red meat and choose the right kind. Prioritize grass-fed and finished, whether that's beef, lamb, goat, bison. If you're eating wild meats, say for example venison, these are all excellent. Eat that protein throughout the day. Pair it with other nutrient-dense foods like nutrient-dense fats. Get some good high-quality fruits and vegetables in the diet so you can optimize for your digestion and your absorption. And let the red meat be part of the foundation that's going to lower your inflammation, steady your blood sugar, provide the precursors for those neurotransmitters, and ultimately stabilize your mood and energy. This isn't opinion, it's just physiology. Red meat, it's not causing depression, and in many cases, it's helping prevent it. If this video has reframed the way that you think about food and mental health, don't forget to give this video a like and make sure you share it with someone else who's been avoiding red meat because of fear and not facts. And if you want to see part 2, where I delve deeper into how red meat supports your brain and acts as an antidepressant, go ahead and hit that video on the screen right now.